Welcome to Talk Universe. I'm your host, Sir Charles Schultz. This is the show for Wednesday, January 11th, 2017. And on tonight's show, we're going to confront what are considered to be the 10 biggest problems in the world. And we're going to look at it from a society and technological standpoint, and we'll see what we can be doing about these problems. I hope everybody's having a good new year. So far, it looks very promising. A lot of the craziness from last year might have been left behind. Let's cross our fingers. Let's hope a little there. Tonight, we really need to look at our world and how it's in the situation it's in. And one of the ways we find out, of course, is to look at polls, take people's opinions. Now, a poll isn't always scientific, and there are different opinions based on who you ask and where you ask, and even how you phrase the questions. But I've done a survey of a few different polls online, and I've found numerous ones based from groups that study the problems in our world and even from businesses. And I found one in particular, Business Insider, that seems to be actually pretty good. The information in it looks very compelling. I also have listed a few items from other sources as well, and we'll briefly touch on those things and try and figure it out. And the problems range from everything from, employment, problems with encroaching AI, taking jobs in the future, climate change and things happening in the world, the destruction of our resources. A lot of these are perception issues, the issues of nuclear security and biological security. So we're going to talk about a number of these issues and see which ones really stand out. And we need to really think about what we're doing to our world, and I know I've done shows in the past on whether we're destroying our planet or not, and the consensus is yes, we definitely are. But I also know that we have the technical ability and the moral imperative to take care of our planet, or there won't be a future generation. So we have a lot of issues to talk about tonight, and I'm going to get right into that right away here. And also as a reminder, anyone who wants to ask a specific question or make a point can contact us through our Facebook page, social media, talkuniverse.org, or you can also email us, admin@talkuniverse.org, and we'll take those questions and we'll answer them on the air. So this is the show for it. If you have concerns or you want to express an opinion about it, or you have a specific question about what we're doing to our planet, feel free to send that information to us right away, and we'll catch it, and we'll use it. So let's get started with what was considered to be the number 10. 14.2% of the people polled on this, on an average, said that their number 10 problem was the lack of economic opportunity and unemployment. Now, it's true. In our world, everything is based on economics and money, and so it means we all have to participate in the system just to stay alive. And I think that the big issue here is, yes, there is a lack of jobs. Automation and advancing technology makes it easier to produce the things we need with less human effort and less time invested in it. And that's just natural. It makes life easier. But the flip side of that is this. If you're tied into a society that depends on wages, on working to produce an income, to get everything you need, then you have a limit already built in. And the issue is very simple. If you lived on a farm, or you lived with the Amish, or you were disconnected from the bulk of the financial system, you would be growing your food and making your things and trading with people. And in times past, this worked very, very well. I mean, everything that we know grew from this system. As we've become more and more plugged into the industrial age and the computer age and the economics involved in it, we find that there are many products you and I can't produce without the use of a factory or high tech. And so because we want our life to have a certain standard of ease and availability of things and goods, we tend to get into the wage slave system, so to speak, and we end up tied to the system, because then we become liable for taxes and other issues that you can't go in with a couple of pigs and a bag of corn and pay your taxes. In times past, yes, you could, but today everything is based on the dollar or other currency units. So the lack of economic opportunities and the issues with unemployment come with the fact that, number one, a lot of people, let's face it, a lot of people don't have the technical skills to work in today's world. And a lot of the work that we need requires technical skills. And so without the proper education, it can be difficult. I know that there are many people in this country who have a hard time getting a job that allows them to perform in a specific manner, and I'll get right to the point about that. Trade schools are often looked down upon as if they're something less than useful, and we're often pushed to go for a degree, a higher degree. And in most cases, jobs really don't need a higher degree. They need people who are skilled with their hands and they're cunning enough to be able to solve a problem properly. And this is a real issue. Unless you have the hands-on skills to make things work, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, because anybody can talk a good talk, but until the rubber hits the road, you don't really know what they're made of. Here's another issue. I notice many people in the United States live in a subculture, and the subculture dominates their thinking. I look at people who grow up in the cities who don't have the linguistic skills to answer a telephone properly, and then they get upset when they can't just get a job answering the phone. And yet we'll find people who immigrate from other countries, and within a couple of years or 5 years, they speak English better than many people born in the United States. Now, if you're unable to get a job answering a phone because your speech, your diction is not clear enough to be understood, or you're speaking a slang that nobody understands or an accent that people don't understand well, there are certain standards in business being able to deal with people, and a specific patois or method of speaking does have its uses. But in the larger world of business, getting things done and thinking clearly and communicating an idea clearly, you've got to have phone skills if you're going to answer a phone. Communication is number one. It shows a window into the operating of your mind. So education is very important, and working with a larger community is very important in order to be successful. And a lot of people don't want to change. But that being said, much of us need to be able to have skills that allow us to work and live. And the system that we're in, that we're forced to conform with, is not a system that guarantees us all work or productive outcome. So the problem very simply is this. Our economic system is defined in such a way that everything is based on your wages being exchanged for dollars. And many of the system's flaws are centered on the fact that the system does not guarantee a job for you. You're tied into a system where you have to work for a living, but the system doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to work for a living. That's a major flaw, and I don't know an easy way around that one. Now, the number 9 issue, voted by 15.1% of the participants, was food and water security. And this is a big one. You know, in many places in the world, there just isn't enough food, and there's not an availability of fresh water for drinking or for agriculture. And water is, as we all know, the key for survival. You can live anywhere on Earth as long as you have fresh water and a little sun and a little soil, because you then have the ability to generate your food or whatever you need. And without that water, you can't live, your livestock can't live, and your crops can't live. So water and food are, amazingly, they're at the number 9 position. But security for water and food, it seems to me that it would be a lot more fundamental than that. Nevertheless, we have a severe shortage of drinking water in many places, and a lot of it is exacerbated by the fact that contaminated water is being passed off as safe drinking water. And this has repercussions, long-term repercussions, because, like the Flint water crisis, which I mentioned previously, the levels of lead and contaminants in the water cause brain damage, and they cause really severe health problems, neurological problems. Your water supply is killing you in some places, and many people aren't aware of that. And many U.S. cities, I think 25% of them that they tested, showed elevated levels of toxins such as lead and arsenic. And something most definitely has to be done about this. When your water supply is cut off, your life is controlled by water, and companies are controlling that right now. Many don't feel that having clean drinking water is a fundamental human right. Well, the fact is, fresh air and sunlight might not be listed in the Bill of Rights, but by God, they're necessary, and if you don't have them, you're not going to live. So water should be, well, let's face it, the necessities for life that were provided by the world around us are your rights. You have a right to live. And I think that, in a roundabout way, it's stated in the Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you don't have the fundamentals for life, you certainly won't live. Now, if it comes down to it and you're of responsible age or an adult, you have the ability to generate some income or grow some food or something. You have the ability to support yourself if you've got that. And that's very important to recognize. But the security for food and water is a worldwide issue, and something must be done about it, and we are destroying those sources. Now, the number 8 issue that was mentioned, and this is by a 15.5% vote, was the lack of political freedom and political instability. So here's what it comes down to. Politics is based on policy, a method of dealing with situations and other governments. And politics is supposed to work in our favor. It's supposed to be a tool to make our lives easier so we don't have to go out there and fight our unknown neighbors who are trying to take our land or harm us. And politics has been a massive failure on a worldwide scale. There's no question about that. But the lack of political freedom, your inability to act, that's a huge one. Because if you're not allowed to do things, well, let me come back to an earlier stance here. Politics often restricts your freedoms or your ability to do things. In the real world, it's assumed you can do anything except those things that bring you harm or people around you harm. In the political world, you're not allowed to do anything unless they give you a permit for it, more or less. And political freedom is a big one because somebody sits in an office and makes some rules and says, well, here's what you will and won't do. But many of those people are disconnected from the actual fundamental needs of living. Political instability is another one. Sometimes you have a system that may or may not work for you, but is the system stable? Is it being usurped? Is it being taken over or corrupted? Instability means you have nothing to count on. And one thing that people need is some fundamental assurance that things are going to be the same today as they were before. We've learned how to live with a certain situation, for bad or for good. We learn how to deal with our world. And when the world is unstable and things go through abrupt or unpredictable changes, it doesn't allow us the ability to know what's going to happen next. So political instability and a lack of political freedom are huge because they act as a brake on human activity. They act as, well, unknowns that make your life unpredictable. You don't know if you're breaking the law if you do a certain thing. You don't know if what you're doing is restricted for some reason. And a lot of people in many parts of the world feel that somebody will descend upon you in the middle of the night and take action because they don't like what you've done. We need to have a simple, easily understood, predictable, rational, moral system. And I think that a lot of it comes down to the fact that many politicians feel the way to solve a problem is to make a law and then make sure people follow the law. The problem with that is making a law makes a lot of people who aren't criminals by definition. The real issue is we don't need to make laws to make life better. We need to create good examples that are so interesting and innovative and good that other people see them and want to emulate them. You don't control people by making laws. You create examples they really want to live by. That's the way you do it. That's the enlightened method of dealing with things. Now, you can recognize that really there are two classes of laws immediately that emerge from political systems, and one is meant to control economics and is supposed to be a regulator of, let's say, the finances and the flow of money. And the other one is basically about justice. It's supposed to be supporting clearly the needs of a society, the security and safety and the justice of the people who live within that system. We see that there's actually another class of laws that is meant to regulate and control human behavior. Now, yes, there may be a need for this to a point. We obviously need something to prevent people from committing crimes, and there have to be repercussions for committing crimes. The issues are we don't see an even-handed approach to this. We don't see a uniform application of the law. We see what appears to be special classes of people emerging that don't get prosecuted when they break the laws or they pay it off and they have the resources to do that monetarily. Unless we feel that there is equal justice, then we're going to feel that any political system or legal system is corrupt and not beneficial. So I don't know exactly how we get around that except with more transparency. After the break, we're going to look into some more of these problems and discuss some of the possible solutions. You're listening to Talk Universe. I'm Sir Charles Schultz. There are so many problems in the world, and this list of 10 that I'm covering are just from one specific Business Insider survey that was taken, and it's taken worldwide. I find it very interesting that in many parts of the world, some of these are considered non-issues, and others are having a very high priority. But we'll look at that as well as some of the issues that are not on the list. I've got about 9 other things that are not covered in this survey, but I feel that they do deserve an honorable mention. So we'll get around to those as well very shortly. When we continue our list, we go to number 7. And 16.5% of the respondents felt that the lack of education was a major problem. Now, this I agree with 100%, and the reason I say this is there are a couple of science fiction writers, and there are also science writers and futurists that I really respect, and I enjoy reading their works, and Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle are the two that come to mind immediately. And they've gone through some of these issues at length under various articles that they've written. And one of the really detailed articles that was written showed that we had 4 basic problems in the world. One was population growth, and one was energy shortages, and another was education, and others. Anyway, to summarize, in the end, it all really came down to education, because if you had education, you would know how to handle all these problems. And so when people say the number 7 problem is education, I disagree. Personally, I feel that the number 1 problem is, or possibly 2, is education. Because the fact is, if you have education and you are able to do some radical changes to the way you think, bring it around to real critical thinking skills, you are able to analyze the problems around you and see through the garbage. You're able to cut through it and get right to the root of the matter. And this is what we need. We need a world of critical thinkers who are educated and have access, a free flow of information, I should say. They should have an access to a free flow of information. When we hear about organizations trying to take control of the internet and control the flow of traffic on it, for me, this is dangerous to humanity. If you remove the free flow of truthful, available information, unlike anything we've had in a century past or before, you cut right to the heart of the survival of humanity. The free flow of information is absolutely essential, and education is absolutely essential, because what makes us successful organisms is our ability to think and learn and be rational. When we remove that, we change the status of human beings to little more than animals that can be pushed around like cattle. And this is not the sort of picture that I want to see for our world. We each have minds and the ability to do things with them. Education, in my feeling, is number 1. But the survey listed it as number 7, and I'm just going to report that and make sure you understand what my position is on this as well. Now, the number 6 problem listed, and this was by 18.1% of the respondents, was safety, security, and well-being. This is really an interesting one, because security, knowing that everything is as it should be, knowing that you have control of your life and your environment. Safety, knowing that you can expect to live another day or not be maimed or injured, that your family is safe. This is a big one. If we were living in the natural world without human intervention, if we were back in the days when we basically lived in tribes and wandered the plains, one of our biggest considerations would certainly be safety, because without the knowledge that we can live another day, we have no reason to plan for anything or to go any farther than the hand-to-mouth sort of struggle to survive that animals themselves face. It is our intellectual faculties that allow us to be safe. And when we get into a civilization, we trust that the other members of that society will not harm us. Now, we know that's all, it's highly theoretical. It's not true. For the most part, people won't harm you, or they won't go out of their way to cause you damage or harm. But we also know that there's always a need for police and a need for public safety. So many people in the world feel they don't have that. A significant number of people in the world don't have that. And this is because there is no control, there is no power to control your environment. I often bring it back to this point. Why do we build houses? We build houses and homes to control our environment, to have control over the things that we've created. Not just our well-being and our health and the ability to keep mosquitoes and bugs out, but it is also our ability to create circumstances that we can control when we're preparing our food or making a piece of music or just doing whatever we do as human beings. I should say there's a safety issue. A lot of people don't feel safe in the world. And that really comes down to knowing your neighbors and having the right to defend yourself and be able to stake a claim for your land, your goods, and your works and feel secure that they're not going to be taken from you. And a lot of it comes down to respect. Each of us knows, even in our own homes, we often have to lock a room if we have children, if we have other members of the family. Some of the people around us don't have the same respect for the properties and works of others that we ourselves have, and we recognize that fact. Sometimes it just takes a no or a chastisement or a slap on the hand, but a lot of times people don't understand two little words that would save them a world of trouble, not yours. If I drop something on the street, I know it's pretty much fair game, but I also would hope that somebody else would recognize that this is something important that belongs to someone and would at least make an effort to locate the owner or try to return it. And it doesn't matter if it's a book or a wallet or anything. I know that when I see something that somebody has clearly lost, I try to place it in a spot where if they'll see it, if they happen to come back looking for it. I know that if I go onto somebody else's property or I'm walking down the street and I see something in somebody's yard, just because it isn't being watched over like a hawk, I don't feel the urge to pick it up. If somebody leans a bicycle up against a tree, I know it's not my bicycle. I'm not going to touch it. And there are too many people who simply feel that they can walk up and take anything they want if nobody's watching. It tells you a lot about what's in their heart. And we need to know that there are people who are raised properly to have respect for others' possessions and where the boundaries are. But this isn't just an issue that happens between people, because it happens between civil groups or governments and people. And many times, in the U.S., we've had civil forfeiture where police simply come in and say, well, we're taking this because we suspect there might have been a crime involved, and particularly money or certain types of properties have been removed from people without due process. And this is purely theft, which is being recognized more and more widely these days by many local governments, and it's being brought to a halt. Because basically, we're guaranteed due process under the law, and if any organization, be it a civil one or a governmental one or whatever, comes in and simply takes your stuff without any crime or charges or anything, I mean, there's no other word for it. It is theft. So the fact of the matter is there are companies, organizations, and governments that, as a rule, are more powerful than any one individual. And we need to have some sort of, we need to have justice in place. We need to have protection for your liberties and your security. And that's what our laws and Constitution are supposed to do. But of course, they're not the same all over the world. There are very different systems, and we know that there are issues with our own laws and certainly with those in other countries. So security is a big issue, and it's a difficult one to address because many times the organizations that we put in place to protect us, to shield us, are actually the ones that create the most egregious situations. So it's going to take some real thinking to find an easy way out of this. Now, this leads us directly to number 5, and the number 5 issue, according to 21.7% of the respondents, was a lack of government accountability and transparency and corruption that is in place right now. So people are recognizing that governments often tend to cloister themselves off, to become separate from the people, and not be accountable to those that they are supposed to serve. Let me make a very clear point. We often talk about our leaders. They're not our leaders. They are our public servants. Never confuse the two terms. Government is there to serve you, to take care of you in ways that an individual cannot. It's not there to baby you and to provide your food and your clothing and your shelter. No. It is there to provide the protection for your liberties and your rights and your security. And that means security from foreign invasion, for instance. Government has only one job, and that's to prevent foreign invasion, basically. So when we talk about accountability, here's a group of people who have been entrenched, they're in place, and they have protections. They make laws that apply to you and I and not to themselves. They find themselves exempt in some way. Well, we need transparency. We need to see what's happening in governments, and this really upsets people. They're realizing that what happens behind closed doors has massive effects on their lives, their finance, every aspect of their existence, and yet we're not privy to what's going on. But it's our money that's paying for these things, and they're acting in our names with our funds. Corruption is rampant in a lot of places, and that's become very, very apparent in the last election here. And we often say, well, that could never happen in the U.S., but it's been happening all along. So one of the biggest problems recognized in the world is the fact that most governments are corrupt. And even if the heads, even if the laws are not corrupt, many of the people who are in the government, the so-called officials, are, and things happen that we're not aware of. Deals are made behind closed doors, a lot of money trades hands. It was once stated that if you ever make money in politics, you're a criminal. And I believe that. There's no way to make money in politics unless you're selling favors or power, or you're influencing things so that somebody else is making a buck or gaining control. So you can't get rich in politics unless you're doing something dishonest, and that's clearly being recognized now. The number 4 issue, and this is by 31.1% of the respondents to the poll, is poverty. Now, if you think about it, poverty has been widespread for millennia, and we will probably never really see the end of it until we see some change in human nature, some basic change in the fundamental behavior of human beings. And I guess if we had to sum it up in a word, it's evil. Until we can eradicate evil, we're going to have poverty. Now, some people will not work, and they will have poverty as a result. And some people work very hard, but due to laws or circumstances or whatever, they will never have much. By and large, the most of us who are capable of working a job will find a way to make it. But it is getting tougher, and it is due to the economies of the world literally being as bad as they are. And again, this comes to policies and decisions that are made that we're not privy to in many cases. But poverty is a worldwide problem, and I've seen a number of countries, I've traveled many places in the world, where the country had amazing resources and ability, and the people were very industrious and worked very hard, and yet everybody was dirt poor. And so you have to wonder, where is all their production going? What are they working so hard for, and why are they always broke? And you can bet that somebody somewhere is making $1 off of them. Somebody's making a profit out of keeping the situation the way it is. You see, it's very easy to understand that if people being secure and happy and wealthy was really the goal, it would be that way. If people really wanted everyone to be happy and secure and prosperous, we would be. The fact that it's the way it is indicates that somebody somewhere very clearly is making it that way. So I won't mince words about it. Poverty is being created. Poverty is a state that is being created, and we literally have enough wealth in this world so that everybody could live the same way that we do in the United States of America. We could do it right now if we really wanted to do it. If you stop and think about the trillions, literally trillions, that's thousands of billions of dollars that are spent on warfare and destruction and subversion and developing weapons that we never want to see used, you will understand very quickly that somebody is doing this. This isn't just a random event. And many people will, for the most part, work if given the opportunity. Most people will work if they have the opportunity, if they know it's the difference between them going hungry or their children going hungry and having what they need. They'll choose to work. So the question is, what do you do about poverty? How do you solve it? Well, you can't just make a handout because it's gone. You need to set a system up that generates as much as it consumes, and that means setting up clean water and farming and places for them to take their kids for school and clothing. And these are actual industries that we can set up anywhere if we really wanted to. And we keep talking about the third world or the developing world. How long does it have to develop before it has what we have? Really think about that. They've been developing for centuries. We'll be back after the break. This is Talk Universe. Think about the dichotomies of a world when we can travel to other planets. We can keep people alive in space or at the bottom of the ocean. We routinely drill holes into volcanoes to generate power. We often have the ability to cure diseases that were thought absolutely fatal just a few years ago. We can print organs and replace them. We can use hydroponics and LED illumination to grow huge crops of vegetables inside a supermarket in Japan. We can do nearly anything we put our minds to. And yet, there are still only a handful of people in the world living comfortably. Most of the rest are in very questionable circumstances. Poor, without water, without food, without shelter. And we tolerate this. We don't do anything about it. We have the capability of solving all of our problems, and that much I do know. And yet our world is in sorrier shape now than it's been. Now many will argue that even the worst off in this world today, on average, are far better off than people of generations ago. That's probably true, and I've seen a lot of evidence that that is true. Just the same, everybody has dignity and everybody has needs. And until we can get over our personal interests, our self-interests, and find a way to work with everybody and fix this situation, the world will be full of misery. And it's on the way out. We're destroying our environment. We're using our resources. And yet it doesn't have to be that way. We have more resources than we'll ever need if we're simply very clever about how we gather them, how we use them, and how we close the cycle. If I had a watch, and I'm not talking a digital watch, but one of the old mechanical ones, and one of the gears inside my watch had the propensity for knocking a tooth off the other gears every now and then, I know that that watch wouldn't run very long or very accurately. I'd pull that gear out and I'd replace it. Our planet is like that watch, and we are one of the many gears working in the system, and we're knocking the teeth and the axles out of the other gears. This can't go on. We've got to get our heads together, get our act straightened out. We don't have much time to do it either, but we do know how. Keep that in mind. Now this brings us right to our number 3 issue, and according to 33.8% of the responders to the survey, it was religious conflicts. And this is interesting because religion as a whole is not based on physics or science or anything of the sort. It is belief. It is an organized system of practices based on belief. And belief is a funny thing. You know, we often talk about truth. We often talk about facts, but very few people seem to be aware of the difference between the two. And the fact is that fact is something that no matter who you are, you measure it, and it's consistent and sticks around with reality. Truth, on the other hand, is defined as being true either as an act of faith or based on some sort of story or evidence that seems compelling. And logically, it can be derived from some foundation truths. But it doesn't mean that the truths have to be facts. Logic is, after all, based on symbolics and operations on data, true and false states. So it doesn't mean that the states have to be true or have to be false. We're simply defining what they are and performing operations on them to derive results. So truth and fact are usually very different. And to illustrate what I mean, I can say, if it's raining outside and you have your umbrella, you won't get wet. If it's raining outside and you don't have your umbrella, you will get wet. Now, that's true, quite likely, but that doesn't mean that it is raining. It doesn't mean you do or don't have your umbrella. I'm simply assigning logical states and performing an operation and deriving a result, and even that might not be true. So religion often places itself in a very untenable position, and many people believe fervently wonderful and attractive stories about their religion, but everybody who grows up in a specific religion is influenced by that religion more than any other. And if you've got 300 or 400 different belief systems, logically somebody's wrong, and not necessarily is anybody right. It simply means they have different systems and different beliefs. Now the real issue here is that people are killing other people over their belief or lack of belief in certain systems. And yet the system that they are espousing as being the one true way doesn't necessarily have any foundation in reality. There's usually a germ of truth in the history or something behind it. But let's face facts. If you follow a system of beliefs that advocates killing or murdering or hurting other people just based on what they believe, you really need to re-examine your basic tenets, your core of belief. You need to understand what this is all about. Life is about enjoying yourself, succeeding, having a good existence, and not hurting others. If you really get down to the core of most religions, a lot of the time it's simply do what is right and get along. Now, I think that if we all basically took care of each other the way we should, cared for each other, and just watch out for each other's interests, life could be fantastic. And it wouldn't matter what you believed as long as we adhered to the old love thy neighbor principle. It makes a lot of sense. The issue is we don't have that happening. We have people who are going full militant and shooting and bombing and burning, and they're taking over territory one way or another. And this is conquest and warfare. This is not religion. Religion is not meant to be a system for conquering others. It is meant to be a system for unifying, for bringing peace and harmony, not discord. So the problem with religion in the world is that so many practitioners of religions are literally at war with the practitioners of other religions. This has got to stop. In the best of worlds, we create examples that are so brilliant and wonderful and compelling that others who see how we're living and the examples we've created would want to emulate them, would want to live that same way. And religion has a responsibility to create a state of mind, a state of grace that others wish to emulate. If you want to see the world influenced positively by religion, you've got to get rid of the outbreed or take over the other mindset. It just plain doesn't work. We see where it's gotten us today. And I can't think of any religion that isn't at fault from this. So the fact is, look at what's in your heart. You know what's right. Don't hurt people. Love your neighbor. It's very simple. We would put an end to this religious issue immediately if we could get people to see that we are one species and we need to work together. And I think it's interesting that this brings us right to our number 2 issue. And by 38.5% of the respondents surveyed, it was large-scale conflicts and wars. It's fascinating to think that many of those wars were started by religion, the root cause. And in some cases, it's really simply striving for resources or control. And the resources can be land, oil, minerals, water. The basic causes of war simply are that usually one group has done something grievous to another, or at least in times past this was true. One group encroached on another's territory or hurt their citizens or whatever, and they responded and defended themselves. In many cases, one group saw that another group had some land or water or resources that they wanted, and they would go in and they'd fight and they'd take it. In some cases, wars of conquest really unified people after it was all done and created a larger force, which then went on to roll over the next guy. And this is true that you're gaining a unity, but you're killing a lot of people in the process. And wow, there are pros and cons for almost every sort of activity that humans engage in. Warfare has often been stated as being very positive because it causes technical innovation, an explosion of creativity. Well, why couldn't we have done that before trying to shoot somebody? We are supposed to be capable of controlling our actions, supposed to be better than the animals, and yet we turn around and do exactly the same things they do, only with real bloody efficiency. We get together in large groups and carry grudges and weapons, project our force and our will at a distance on others, without worrying about the consequence until later, if at all. And warfare is really the stupidest thing we can do. Warfare is truly not an option in a limited space. If you can imagine everybody on Earth living in one big auditorium and fighting within that auditorium and polluting within that auditorium, you'd get a much clearer picture of what's really happening on this planet. This is just a big auditorium, and we're all on stage, and our actions are very clearly affecting our world. They're influencing each other, and people do carry grudges. People do remember what you did. I often heard that a lot of times people won't remember what you did for them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. This is probably one of the most fundamental things you have to remember about warfare and any sort of conflict. They won't remember what you did, but they sure remember how you made them feel, and they will come back on you. We've got to find ways to rationally and logically solve our problems. Warfare certainly isn't it, and I know that we've been at war for years and years, and it seems that it never stops, and we've even been in non-declared wars, police actions. We're not the world policemen. What the heck are we doing? We need to step back, let people sort things out. The only times we should ever intervene is when it directly influences our security and our safety. If we're being attacked, if we feel that there's a real threat there, if there's clear and credible evidence. And, I can't think of anybody that wants to go right out and start killing people or whatever. And you sometimes hear people say, let's go over there and bomb these guys, they're the problem. No, they're not. I can't think of any credible evidence for anything that would bring us to the brink of war right now. And yet people who are loudly proclaiming let's go to war are just the ones that would never sign up or be in the front lines. We really ought to have a law that says everybody who supports a war needs to sign up for a draft. I think that would turn things around real fast. So how do we stop warfare? We have to remove the profit from it. We have to show that the only credible reason for you to ever go to war is to defend yourself against attack. There is no reason for us to attack anyone else, ever, unless they are a direct, clear, and present danger to us, unless they are attacking us. There should only be rationalizing this thing through. There should only be wars of defense, never of conquest. And I understand we sometimes intervene in situations, but you know what? Anytime you get 3 or more people together, it's more or less a mob, and even if they're sitting down at a table trying to work things out, there's no guarantee they're going to arrive at a rational answer to it. I think the most damage is done by the mobs in suits and ties sitting around a boardroom table, and I've said that before, and I do believe that. We are not, as a species, mature enough and educated enough and wise enough to really handle our affairs properly. We're still not there, not by a long shot. And warfare has served positively and negatively over history, but we need to quit. We've got to stop this, because we're just killing people and wrecking part of the planet, generating a lot of hard feelings, and there is no victory in that. It's all ashes. So let's get to the number one problem, and this is a big one. And 45.2% of the responders to the survey stated that climate change and destruction of natural resources were the number one issue facing our generation, our planet today. And I agree with that. We need to focus on the fact that the world is not a static place. It's constantly changing. And a lot of people will want to fight with you over this change being caused by human activity. There's no doubt that we are polluting, we're wrecking the environment, we're mining things out and leaving gaping holes in the ground with pollutants and toxins in it. That's absolutely true. We are chewing up the planet and spitting it out and making it uninhabitable. We're destroying the water table by fracking. We're leaving leached chemicals from mining and metal recovery processes. We're making landfills. We're polluting the air. We're polluting the oceans. The radioactivity in the oceans and the chemistry and the plastic in the oceans is lethal to the entire planet. Is the climate changing? Absolutely. It does that. It's been doing it constantly all along. We have been very fortunate to be in a fairly stable period of climate change, and it's been pretty clement for the last couple thousand years, but even there's been variability. The fact is, the planet's climate is not stable, and while we probably are having some effect on it, nature overall is having the greater effect, and we can't control nature. What we must really do is eliminate the effects that we are having on the planet, control them, and start planting things. If we feel that greenhouse gas emissions are a problem, sure, we can restrict some activities that generate those gases. We can change our technology so we don't depend on burning things. But the biggest issue here is CO2 is absorbed by plants. If we truly felt we were going to fix things, we'd be planting. And that's that in a nutshell. We'll cover the remaining issues after the break. This is Talk Universe. Now, when I made this list, I looked at a number of surveys online and a number of data collection agencies that went around and surveyed people on various things. And I looked at other groups that evaluated news articles and other sources of information to try and find the issues that, as a general consensus, were felt to be the ones that were most greatly affecting our planet today, issues we had to face right away because of their severity. And I also came up with an alternate list of things that are very important that we have talked about from time to time on the show and certainly are of great importance. And so I'm going to take some time to go over at least 9 other items briefly and have a quick look at what we might be able to do to alleviate some of these problems. So the rest of these issues, in no particular order, one of them is biosecurity. Many people are worried about engineered organisms getting into the environment and doing things, and this is understandable because we've already had a couple of near misses, and we do have organisms that are gene-tailored that are out in the environment and not controlled, and they're spreading and infecting natural vegetables and plants with the genes that have been put in them. There certainly should be concern about somebody creating an organism with CRISPR technology or other gene editing technologies that are out there. It would not be very difficult for a dedicated, chaotically minded individual to come up with something that could be very dangerous and could wipe out humanity. So biosecurity is a key worry. Nuclear security, of course, is another one. Many people are worried about the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and it looks like we may be closer to using them now than we've been in many years. We've had a relative period of peace as far as everybody's perception is concerned, and now there have been threats within the last few months. And the fact is, the public is not fully aware of exactly what's going on. We don't really know what's happening, and we only hear what we're told by the news, and it's pretty clear at this point that many of the major news outlets are not reliable, that what's carried over them is censored or spun. So it makes it extremely difficult to get reliable information to work from, and that's a really big one right there. Global priorities research. Now, this is an interesting one. People have a lot of creativity and the ability to come up with solutions to problems, and we certainly have solutions to just about everything. Implementing those solutions is a problem many times. But researching what the global priorities are, what do we really need, and how do we allocate funding to specifically work on those issues? So global priorities research is something that we really need to take a long, hard look at and get on right away, because it shows us a pathway using the resources we have at hand to solving many of these issues and having something done about it. Now, health in poor countries is always a big issue. When you look at the economic indicators and population indicators, we find that most people live in poor countries. And, that's just the way it is, and nothing is really being done about it. We know that many of the charitable organizations that are meant to help poorer nations when they're hit with hurricanes or natural disasters or earthquakes end up eating most of the money themselves, and very little of it actually goes to solving the problems. And again, we get back to evil, greed, people wanting things they didn't work for. The definition of greed is the desire for unearned wealth is destroying many of our efforts to do good. And so many of the organizations you may donate money to are really not putting that much in the hands that it's supposed to reach. And health in poor countries is one of these issues. It is unfortunate that many of the people in poorer countries do not have access to good health care, and they often are, besieged by many vaccinations for stuff. They don't have any food or water, but they can bring in a few $1 million worth of vaccines. I'm really at odds with this sort of thinking, because what people really need in poor countries is wealth. They need the ability to generate wealth. They need clean water, roads, schools, and places to farm. They need work. And if we really want to solve poverty in poor countries, you get in there, you drill some water wells, you put some pumping stations in, you put some low-cost solar or wind power stations in to run everything, and you get them on the road to having clean water and places to grow their food, and schools and roads so they can transport their goods. I mean, what is the infrastructure of any country? What do you require in order to prosper? That's what we need to focus on. Not, millions of dollars of vaccines. That's all well and good, If you're really pursuing health, then there are ways to do it. And if you really want people to not be poor and to no longer be dependent on you or on anyone, you give them the capability of working for what they want. Factory farming, this is another one. It's estimated that some 50 billion animals are slaughtered every year to feed people. And factory farming is just downright evil. There are many companies that are responsible, and I know a number of farmers who raise their own meat. They raise their own animals and slaughter them and process them. But they don't torture the animals. They don't cage them. They don't have them tied to a post where they can't move or in a tiny cage where they can't move. Factory farming is an absolute blight, and it's something that has to be ended. I think I've said that about 7 or 8 things here tonight just on this show. There are numerous issues that we need to face and end, and factory farming is one of them. There are much better ways to do this. If you're going to eat meat, you can raise animals in humane, decent surroundings. You don't have to hurt chickens to get eggs. If you treat them properly, they'll lay eggs, and they'll be healthy. And the healthier chickens lay bigger, better eggs. That's just a fact. I mean, I know personally from farming and raising chickens. So it isn't a difficult equation. And if you are trying to scrimp every penny out of the process and the animals suffer as a result, you're in the wrong business. It's that simple. The risks of artificial intelligence. This is another one. People are rightly concerned with the growth in artificial intelligence and what it means to jobs, particularly to other issues that a lot of people aren't aware of. Many of our decisions are being handed off to expert systems or AI systems, and very little human intervention occurs when those decisions are made. This can be bad because we have specific needs, and I've mentioned this many times. We have specific needs that have to be addressed in order to live successfully and healthy and to be self-sufficient. And let's face it, all of us want to be self-sufficient. We want to be able to depend on ourselves and not be at the will or whim of somebody else. That's just human dignity, the ability to control your own destiny. AI does add up to some very interesting challenges. It can solve a lot of problems for us. It also can create a lot of problems, and rampant unemployment. Unemployment is on the rise, and a lot of it is because machinery is taking over jobs, and many people get into the gloom and doom mode. Well, that doesn't have to necessarily be the case. I would just as soon have machines running cleanup of landfills and, specific dirty jobs, mining and so forth. I'd rather have machines doing it than human beings who can get killed or trapped in a mine shaft or end up in an explosion or something and exposed to toxic materials. We make machinery to make our life easier. The problem is when we get into AI, we often apply it to jobs that normally required human thought. But you see, there are differences between making a logical decision and making a reasonable decision. Because in our lives, we know that it takes much more than logic. It takes an emotional component in order to understand what people's needs are. So artificial intelligence could be very scary, and for many people it is. We are applying it in fields where I think that the yield is not optimum. We're applying it to warfare. We're applying it to the stock market. We're applying it to profit and gouging and injuring people when we need to be aiming it to pursuits that will benefit everyone. Why don't we have AI working on cleaning up the environment and helping slow down population growth without placing people at risk, and finding alternatives for the materials that we need that won't destroy our environment? So we have many goals that AI could accomplish for us, and it could do so beneficially, very nicely, and we could work hand in hand with it. And the fact is, if we had our own sources of food and power and everything we need, and the ability to trade with others as we wish, we wouldn't be in a position where we require employment. We could live our lives and aim toward bettering ourselves, understanding the world around us, making art, making music, or just enjoying life. I think that this is something that we really need to focus on. Climate change. Absolutely, this is a big one. But I think we're going about this all wrong. I mentioned earlier that if we felt that greenhouse emissions were at fault for changing the climate, then we need to be planting something. What I see is governments are raising taxes on carbon emissions and specific types of pollution, but they're not doing anything positive with the money they're collecting. Where's all that money going? Trillions of dollars are being collected in the name of global climate change or global warming or saving the environment. But where does that money go? I don't see any positive outcome, and I think that people need to be called onto the carpet. And we need to ask some very hard questions and get some answers. Where's the money going? What are they doing? And how fast are we doing it? This is not something we can dally around with. We need to do something immediately. Another one that came up that was rather interesting was smoking in developing countries. Here we are with that developing countries. They don't say third world countries anymore. They say developing countries. I think this is a bit of a misdirection for us. However, smoking in developing countries. Well, it's an issue, but the fact is you're able to make your own choices. You're an adult. And if you choose to poison your lungs, that's great. The only issue that really arises then is that you fall into the healthcare system and you suck money out of the healthcare system, and people who don't smoke, who live healthy lifestyles, don't have resources in healthcare that they need when they run into, let's say, an industrial accident or some other problem. Now, yes, people can choose to do whatever they wish through their lives. They can drink, they can smoke, they can snort whatever they want. And, a lot of that is illegal, of course, but people do it anyway. It doesn't stop them. I think the issue, again, comes down to education. We need to know what's really going on, and we need to we need free education. I would much rather live in a country where education is very, very cheap or free, and people are driven to learn. I would rather live in a country of experts than a country of dolts. And that just makes perfect sense. I don't want somebody who flunked out of every course fixing the brakes on my car. I don't want somebody who wasn't able to pass some basic tests doing the wiring in my house. I want people who truly understand what they're doing, but not only that, they enjoy what they're doing. Come on, we can always find a job we enjoy. Land use reform. This is another one. This is where we look at how land is being used and we change that for greater benefit. Now, clearly, I can give an example that's a little tough to understand for some people. There are so many empty houses and so many homeless people. We could put all the homeless people in empty houses. But the issue is this. Many of those empty houses belong to private individuals such as you and I. And if somebody isn't able to pay the rent on that house, or if they have questionable habits of hygiene, or they're, bad influences, they drink, they smoke, they have loud people over, you're going to be very, very circumspect about putting somebody in your house for free. You're still having to pay for that house. I know that if I own a house that's empty, but I'm paying the rent, and somebody moves in for free, I'm not going to be very happy. So let's face the fact. There are homeless people and there are empty houses, but that doesn't mean that there's a one-to-one solution to the problem. You come face to face with how charitable you're feeling and what your economic needs are. If I have to pay for two houses and I'm deriving no benefit, in fact, it's being damaged by somebody living in it who is unable to pay, then what do I do? What's my recourse? Why would I even bother to work and earn and try to have properties to rent? You understand where I'm going with this. We need to have something to fix those issues. I think that education really is at the very bottom, the root of this. Education and free flow of information. Technically, that's not difficult. We're in a world that is wired. We have literally the archive of humanity online for free. And it doesn't take any difficulty for us to find that information. Now, instead of a specific book recommendation this week, I'm going to say pick a subject that really gets your goat, something that really makes you angry, and read not only the things you want to read, but read the opposition as well. You need to understand the old statement, know your enemy. Know what the questions are, know what the opposing viewpoints are and how they're founded. Learn about it, and see what you think about it. Now, it might not lead to anything, but it might help you understand things a little better. The world is a lot more complicated in some ways than we think. And remember, if all your research is done online, there's a reason it's called the Web of Lies. You need to develop a good, let's call it politely, junk detector. We need to know when what we're reading doesn't make any sense. Develop those critical thinking skills. Ask questions. Ask yourself questions that make you uncomfortable. We have to push ourselves to our limits in order to excel. This is one of our human traits. I hope you've enjoyed the show tonight, and we're going to get into this in more depth in another show and look at more solutions. This has been a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening to Talk Universe. I'm Sir Charles Schultz. Have a great night.